Paul Doroshenko. Welcome to the first in a series about the BC Motor Vehicle Act. Now, I'm part of the BC Driving Lawyers. We're a group of lawyers with particular expertise in defending driving cases. In this new series, we're going to look at the Motor Vehicle Act. That's the statute, the piece of legislation that governs what drivers can and can't do here in BC. Today I'm going to explain how driving legislation in British Columbia got to where it is now. To do that, we need to look at the laws that preceded the Motor Vehicle Act, what came before it. And in order to do that, we've got to go way back to the beginning of the last century, to when motor vehicles first started appearing on our roads here in BC. And you can imagine how alarming cars were when they first showed up. Capable of speeds much faster than horses. There's no horse out in front, and all of a sudden these things are flying down the road. It must have been startling for a lot of people. And so it didn't take long for the BC government to decide that it had to do something, it had to take action, it had to legislate. So in 1904, the province introduced its first ever piece of motoring legislation. It was known as the Motor Vehicle Speed Regulation Act, a bit of a mouthful. It set out brand new rules, and a lot of them still exist in some form today. Before anyone could drive, they had to obtain a permit from the superintendent's office. The government also realized early on that cars could go fast, and they knew that they posed a risk to unsuspecting members of the public. So because of this, they decided that they were going to regulate the speed of motor vehicles, and we've almost always had a speed limit of some sort. The first speed limit in BC was 10 miles per hour, which is about 16 kilometers an hour for public highways in cities, towns, and villages. And outside of the cities, towns, and villages, drivers were allowed to reach the giddy speeds of 15 miles per hour. Racing is something that's been outlawed from the very beginning, and that's something we've seen more or less in every version of the Motor Vehicle Act. More than anything, the 1904 Act is really about safety. Horse riders and passengers in horse-drawn carts suddenly had to share the road with these enormous, fast-moving machines. So drivers had to either reduce their speed drastically when approaching a horse, or if signaled by the rider, they had to stop altogether. By 1911, the BC government enacted a new piece of legislation called the Motor Traffic Regulation Act. One of the things that it included was it made it an offense to drive while you were intoxicated by alcohol, for example. It also set an age limit. You couldn't drive a motor vehicle unless you were at least 17 years old. It also set in place a rule that drivers must drive on the left side of the road. It wasn't until the 1920s that BC joined the rest of Canada, the rest of North America, and switched over to drive on the right. For British Columbia, as for most parts of North America, the 1920s could be called the real start of the automobile age. In 1920, there were 28,000 motor vehicles registered in BC. By 1925, this had grown to 56,000 cars. The total reached nearly 100,000 in 1930 and stayed at that level until 1935, of course, because of the Great Depression. With the start of the automobile age came the Motor Vehicle Act. That's when it was renamed, and it came into effect in 1920. Over the decades that followed, there have been several new versions of the Motor Vehicle Act, but there's also been amendments made to it all the time. As technology got more sophisticated, cars got faster, gradually took over from horses as the principal mode of transportation. Of course, the government has been anxious for the law to keep up. When we start to understand how driving law has evolved over the years, we have a better understanding, and you can start to see why the Motor Vehicle Act exists in the manner in which it does today. So thank you very much for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in future videos. You can find us at bcdrivinglawyers.com, 604-608-1200.